So, what really kicked off the First World War? We've all heard the story about a single gunshot, right? But the truth is, Europe in 1914 was basically a powder keg just waiting for a match. This was a war that totally shattered empires and reshaped the entire world. And its real causes are, well, they're a fascinating and pretty cautionary tale. So, in this explainer, we're going to dig in and uncover all the ingredients that led to what they called the Great War.
If you looked at Europe in the early 1900s, it seemed like it was on top of the world. Industry was absolutely booming, culture was flourishing, it all looked great. But just beneath that shiny surface, the continent was a ticking time bomb. All these rivalries and resentments had been simmering for decades, creating a situation that was just deeply unstable.
Most of us probably learned in history class that the war started with an assassination. And yeah, that's true. But it was only the spark. The bomb itself? It had been in the works for years, built from some seriously powerful and explosive ingredients. So let's break down exactly what those were.
Okay, so to understand the explosion, we first have to get a handle on the powder keg itself. What was it about pre-war Europe that made the whole political climate so incredibly volatile, so ready to just ignite?
And this is the great paradox of that whole era. You had all this incredible innovation and prosperity out in the open, but behind closed doors, leaders were being driven by these deep-seated fears and massive ambitions. Every country was constantly watching its neighbors, sizing them up, and all that suspicion created this dangerous feeling that a huge conflict wasn't just possible, but maybe inevitable. To make sense of all these complicated tensions, historians came up with a really simple but brilliant way to remember them: the acronym M.A.I.N. It stands for the four big, deep-rooted causes of the war. That's militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Let's break them down one by one. First up, M is for militarism. And this wasn't just about, having an army for defense. It was a whole cultural belief that having a powerful military was the ultimate sign of a nation's greatness. This created this really aggressive mindset where war was seen as a totally valid, even heroic way to get things done. And of course, that belief led to a massive arms race all across Europe. The biggest competition was happening at sea. Britain, being an island with a global empire, absolutely depended on having the world's #1 navy. But then Germany started building its own huge fleet to challenge them, and that created a ton of friction and paranoia between the two. Next up, A is for alliances. In this climate of fear, countries started teaming up to feel more secure. They made these formal pacts, a lot of them secret, that basically created this huge web of, I've got your back if you've got mine. The idea was to create a balance of power to stop a war from happening. The huge irony? They actually created a tripwire system that made a massive war almost guaranteed. So by 1914, these alliances had split Europe into two big armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other, the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. The real danger here was that a small local fight could now instantly drag everybody else in, turning a little dispute into a full-blown continental disaster. Okay, our third cause is I, for imperialism. This was the absolute peak of empire building. European nations were in a mad scramble to claim territories all across Africa and Asia. They were after resources, new markets, and just plain old strategic advantage. But this global game of monopoly created all sorts of friction that came right back home to Europe. And here's where you can really see the tension. You had Britain and France, the established giants with these massive global empires. And then you had Germany, a newer, super ambitious nation that felt like it deserved its own place in the sun. Germany's desire to build an empire was a direct challenge to the old guard, and that created a lot of bad blood, especially with Britain.
And finally, we have N for nationalism. And honestly, this might have been the most powerful emotional force of them all. This was way more than just simple patriotism. It was this intense, often aggressive belief that your nation or your ethnic group was superior, and that your interests came before anyone else's. Period.
Now, nationalism worked in a couple of ways. On one hand, it created this fierce rivalry between the big countries. But on the other, it also lit a fire under independence movements inside these huge multi-ethnic empires, like Austria-Hungary. Ethnic groups like the Serbs and the Poles wanted their own countries. This was especially explosive in the Balkans, a region so volatile it was literally nicknamed the powder keg of Europe. And this is where the spark would be lit. So, we have our powder keg, a continent armed to the teeth, tangled up in alliances, fighting over empires, and just boiling with nationalist passion. All it needed was a single spark, and that spark came on a summer day in the city of Sarajevo. The spark was lit on June 28, 1914. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, a guy named Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was visiting Sarajevo. Now, this was a pretty provocative trip, since the area was a hotbed of Slavic nationalism. And as his motorcade drove through the city, both he and his wife were shot and killed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was enraged, and they immediately pointed the finger at their rival Serbia for planning the whole thing. The assassin was a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, and his motive was pure nationalism. He wanted to free the South Slav peoples from Austro-Hungarian rule. He thought that by killing the Archduke, he was striking a blow for freedom. Instead, his one act of violence set off a crisis that would swallow the entire world. It was the trigger for everything that came next. So with that assassination, the fuse was lit. And now, that intricate, dangerous system of alliances, the one that was supposed to keep the peace, was about to do the exact opposite. It was about to drag the world into war. And you won't believe how quickly the dominoes fell. It's stunning. 1. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. 2. Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's big brother, mobilizes its giant army. 3. Germany, who's allied with Austria-Hungary, sees this as a threat and declares war on Russia. 4. And that act immediately pulls in Russia's ally, France, and then pretty soon after, Britain jumps into the fight. The alliance system worked like a charm, and the result was a global catastrophe. Just think about that. From one gunshot to a full-blown continental war. All of this happened in about 5 weeks. The powder keg had exploded, and the world would never, ever be the same again. So why does all this history from over a century ago still matter so much today? Well, because understanding what caused World War I is a critical lesson in just how fast global stability can completely fall apart. And the echoes of that explosion, we can still feel them today. The Great War led to the collapse of 4 massive empires: the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman. It completely redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East. And the unresolved issues and the really harsh peace treaty that ended it, they directly set the stage for the rise of extremism and an even deadlier war, World War II, just 20 years later. And that brings us to one last really crucial thought. Those forces, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, they aren't just stuck in the history books. They are absolutely still shaping our world right now. So the question for us is, can we recognize these echoes from a century ago and maybe, just maybe, learn the lessons we need to stop history from repeating itself? Thanks for watching.